Whenever I see criticism for the Kingkiller Chronicle, a lot of that criticism usually revolves around not liking the protagonist, which is fair. I mean, Kvothe is a very polarizing character. A lot of people love him, and a lot of people hate him. Considering the majority of the story is told through his perspective as he details the events of his life, your enjoyment's gonna hinge on whether you like this character or not. He's a storyteller. He's talented, clever, and quick-witted, but he can also be arrogant and boastful, and has been known to tell lies in order to build up his reputation. But one criticism I often hear from those who didn't enjoy these books is the complaint that Kvothe is a Mary Sue. What is a Mary Sue? I'm glad you asked. Sometimes people say Gary Stew or Marty Stew for the male equivalent, but in most cases, people just say Mary Sue regardless, so we're sticking with that. A Mary Sue originates from Star Trek fanfiction. It's become a useful term, yet an often misused one for a character that is perfect. They do no wrong and lack any noteworthy flaws. Often a young prodigy who performs better at tasks than should be possible given their experience or training. And these characters primarily function as a wish fulfillment fantasy for the author or the reader. The story wraps and warps to fit around the Mary Sue character rather than moving naturally on its own. Often you'll see this term thrown around for characters like Bella from Twilight, Anastasia from 50 Shades of Grey, Luke Skywalker, or Rey from Star Wars. And there's also lots of disagreements over whether or not certain characters are Mary Sues, like Harry Potter, Captain Marvel, Superman, or Katniss Everdeen. Now let me say that a Mary Sue character is not necessarily a bad thing. Usually it does hold negative connotations because these characters can get very tiring and boring to read if they're not written well, but it's perfectly fine to still like a Mary Sue character. After all, Beowulf is a Mary Sue. Some people argue that Katara and Goku are Mary Sues, though I think that's debatable. Do you think Kvothe falls into this category? Do you think he's a Mary Sue? Let me know, because this is a channel where differing opinions are accepted and welcomed. Even if your opinion in this case is wrong, mine is right, obviously. He's an undeniably gifted and talented character with a wide range of skills, but that's really where the comparisons end, since when has intelligence been equivalent to perfection? You don't have to read too far into the text to understand that Kvothe is very flawed and he's a broken person. I'm gonna show you why he simply doesn't fit the definition of a Mary Sue. If anything, his character is subverting that trope. I'll be doing a deep dive on certain events in his life so that we can try and understand this character and effectively debunk this criticism. Kvothe is by no means flawless. He's his own worst enemy. He's thoughtless, impatient, and imprudent. His moral compass is crooked at times, and he's obsessed with the Chandrian and his lust for revenge. If you wipe your binoculars a bit and actually examine this character, you're going to see a deeply flawed one that's not only the hero, but is actually his own villain. A portrait of post-traumatic stress and a self-proclaimed disaster that's brought upon his own tragedy and caused many of the problems going on in the world. In his youth, he was brilliant, but prideful and hot-headed, unable to set aside his own ego, but through skill and many lies, and not to mention a lot of luck, he's been able to achieve legendary status. But first, if you want to be a living legend like Kvothe, you're gonna need an awesome title. Cue the sponsor. This video is sponsored by Established Titles. Do you own land in Scotland? Because you know you could. Established Titles is a fun and original way to preserve the natural woodlands of Scotland and help support global reforestation efforts. Their title packs give you at least 1 square foot of dedicated land and a unique plot number on a private estate in Edelston, Scotland. You even get this fancy official certificate with a crest and everything. If you haven't heard of Established Titles yet, this is a project based on a historic Scottish custom where landowners can be referred to as lairds, or lords and ladies. And with their title packs, you can officially call yourself a lord or lady, and you can put this on your credit card or your dating profile or your plane tickets and so much more. Not only is this a great creative last-minute gift for someone special in your life, but it also helps the planet. They plant a tree with every order, and they work with global charities like One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future to support global reforestation efforts. Now there's another cool detail. The first 200 people to purchase title packs using my link in the description
will get a plot that is within walking distance to my own. Do you know what this means? Depending on how many of you want to be called lords or ladies, we can build our own little kingdom and eventually take over the universe. I've always known I should be a lord. Now, Established Titles is actually running a massive November sale right now. Plus, if you use my code LordJ, you get an additional 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/LordJ and get your gifts now and help support the channel.
In the D&D party, he's not just the powerful wizard, but the charismatic bard and the lying thief. At surface level, Kvothe does appear to be sort of a Mary Sue, a jack of all trades, sort of wish fulfillment character. I would kind of agree with that if I had formed my opinion early on and didn't continue reading. Really, in RPG terms, he's more of a min-maxer, and a min-maxer is someone who sacrifices stats in many abilities to be incredibly good in a limited number of things. For instance, his intelligence and charisma are both pretty high, way above the average. His dexterity isn't too bad, his strength and constitution are pretty average, and his wisdom is really quite low. He can try to avoid his weaknesses by playing to his strengths, but when he's forced into a situation where he needs to use his lower stats, he pays the price. We know he's intelligent and clever, but because of his lack of wisdom, he rarely considers his consequences, and we see he has a major lack of common sense and rushes into things headlong. And this is something Elodin even calls him out on. He's often trying to force feed him some common sense. Kvothe often lets his arrogance and his hot-headedness get the better of him. As a young boy, Kvothe was smart and he knew it, and his quick wit was noticed by others, including Ademre, who told his parents this:
"He will leave his mark on the world as one of the best. Whatever he chooses, if he stays here, I don't doubt he'll become the next Ilian. If he decides to become an arcanist, I bet he'll have a royal appointment by the time he's 24. If he gets it into his head to be a merchant, I don't doubt he'll own half the world by the time he dies."
Later on, Ademre explains how it can be dangerous giving a sword to a thoughtless person, and says,
"You're clever, we both know that, but you can be thoughtless. A clever, thoughtless person is one of the most terrifying things there is. Worse, I've been teaching you some dangerous things."
And then the rest of the book basically shows us how clever yet thoughtless he is. And I think this is what trips a lot of people into thinking he's a Mary Sue. Honestly, having a main character who's much smarter than the average fellow, meaning it's easy for them to slip into this perfect, overpowered character template. But that's not really what Kvothe is at all. Mary Sues are not all about power and skill or even intelligence, but they're about a lack of struggle. Mary Sues are impossible to surpass and they don't make mistakes. And with every page we get of Kvothe being a brilliant prodigy, we get several more of him failing or messing things up or struggling to survive. No doubt Kvothe is academically gifted and he has the advantage of learning all kinds of things, including sympathy from Ademre, while other children his age were out playing games. And for the most part, he grew up around a troupe of talented adults, which likely made him mature faster, and Kvothe is also musically gifted, being one of the Ademre. Music flows in his veins. He was born into it, molded by it. And the time that he spent in the woods after his troupe was murdered, he spent perfecting his skill. He obsessively played his father's lute, one of the only personal possessions he had left. But despite all of his talent, he can also be very thoughtless. Take for example his near-death experience as a young boy when he tries to call the name of the wind using a sympathetic binding, where he bound the air from his lungs to the air outside, making it impossible to breathe. It's his thoughtlessness that's often leading him to folly. Now, Kvothe suffers from PTSD after the traumatic experience of his entire troupe being murdered. Understandable. And in Tarbean, he turns into an almost feral animal who's doing everything to just survive. He steals, lies, and begs, and gets beaten like a street dog. This is not a goody two-shoes Mary Sue. In fact, we often have to question Kvothe's morals. I still remember my surprise during the scene when Kvothe finds Pike's sentimental items, his prized possessions from the boy's likely dead mother. To me, this made me think, well, maybe Pike isn't such a monster. Even if he did beat Kvothe and break his father's lute, maybe he's redeemable. But then Kvothe proceeds to destroy these items, and he stays a little too long, relishing in his revenge, before Pike shows up to break his ribs and stab him with a shiv. And what does Kvothe do? He escalates things to the extreme by luring the boy into an alley, throwing alcohol on him, and setting him on fire. You know, setting a kid on fire and walking away is a clear sign we're not dealing with the typical noble hero. This is not how you write a Mary Sue, it's how you write an anti-hero. Now, before I go on to talk about his time at the university and this darker side we see to him in book 2, I just want to jump to the Frame story for a moment. I love the juxtaposition of his current and past self, the young, hot-headed, and charismatic hero, and the weary man at the inn, who's a shadow of his former self. He's a broken man who's waiting to die. He's lost his true name and seemingly all of his power. In the current Frame narrative, the world is a mess. There's a civil war going on, Skrael attacking people, skin dancers on the loose. It's a very dangerous world, and we know that Kvothe says this was all his fault. This is something that he's caused. This is coming from a man who's changed his name to Kote, meaning disaster. Now, when a skin dancer attacks the inn and Shep is killed, Kvothe tries to stop it. He tries to use sympathy, but he fails. He wasn't able to save Shep. This is not a flawless hero. Also, when the 2 soldiers that Bast hired enter the bar, Kvothe gets his butt kicked again. He wasn't able to awaken any of his power. You see, Kvothe is a tragic hero in the classical Greek tradition. He's hyper-competent, but also hyper-flawed, which ends up leading to his downfall. It's the wasted potential that makes his story so tragic. Pretty much, it's the story of a talented and clever person who's also an idiot and screws things up so bad that he ruins everything. Rothfuss clearly drew a lot of inspiration from Greek and Irish mythologies as well as others, and I think it's fair to say this is where Kvothe's characteristics of brilliance and hubris come from. Now, if anything, he allows these exaggerations and these legends to form and build themselves up around him so that he appears to be this Mary Sue, this invincible being. Yet as he tells his tale, we discover the simple truths behind all of the legends. And often these truths involve luck, lies, or just misinterpretations. This is a story where storytelling itself is an incredibly important aspect. It revolves around legends, myths, and folklore. And one thing we do need to keep in mind is that Kvothe is a liar. I am a myth, a very special kind of myth that creates itself. The best lies about me are the ones I told. One of the consistent messages throughout these books are that stories don't need to be factually accurate to be true. You have to be a bit of a liar to tell a story the right way. Too much truth confuses the facts. Everything we know about the Chandrian, Telu, Eax, or even naming, they all come from stories, and then Kvothe and the reader attempt to extract the truth. As time goes on, we're able to piece together various stories in order to find something that perhaps is true. We find the reality behind the stories. Now, Kvothe is constantly engineering his own myth, and I think Rothfuss purposefully wants the reader to wonder how much is true. And there's many fans that think he's an unreliable narrator. Personally, I think he's slightly unreliable. I think he exaggerates and he glosses over some of his mistakes, and possibly he's not telling us the full truth, but I do think the majority of the story is true. Now, after spending years living on the streets, Kvothe has also become a very untrusting person. At the university, this trauma follows him. He's unwilling to share anything about his past to his closest friends, Will and Sim. And he also struggles to share his true feelings towards Denna. He's someone who would probably even put his friends in danger if it meant helping his cause. In fact, he tries to get Will to risk his position as a scriv to sneak him into the archives, and he manipulates Minette into finding a way into the archives. And he's also not the most skilled person in the university, like many who dislike these books would say. I've seen people claim that he's the perfect student who's good at everything, which is not true. Kvothe really struggles with both math and chemistry by his own account. I mean, alchemy is one of his worst subjects, which is why we barely see him mention it, because he's the one telling the story. And why would he want to focus on his weaknesses? He's very good at sympathy, but he's not nearly as good at sympathy as any of the masters. In fact, Kilvin at one point does a 6-way binding like it was nothing. Devi is also a much more powerful sympathist. He got into the university very young, but Eladin got into the university at an even younger age, and is obviously a much better namer than Kvothe. Even Fela, who's relatively close in age to him, masters the name of stone quicker than Kvothe learns the name of the wind. Kvothe does seem to have some innate ability when it comes to naming, such as when he unwittingly names the horse One Sock, or when he tries to guess the name of Denna's patron. And we also see him gain control over Felurian's true name. But he has an incredibly hard time trying to grasp and gain control of naming, and he's by no means a master. At the university, we get many examples of how he lies and exaggerates in order to build up his reputation. When he jumps off the roof of the crockery, he later hides the embarrassment by telling people that Eladin pushed him. Before he's lashed as a punishment, he takes Nalroot as a precaution to stop him from fainting, and it also has the added effect of stopping him from bleeding. He does this in order to hide any weakness, and after this, rumors begin to circulate at the university that he's a demon or has Fae blood or can see in the dark. However, we don't yet know why he has this desire to make himself a legend. It could be he just wants to be the next Tarbean the Great, or it could have some purpose in his goal for revenge. But let's go back to how he doesn't think sometimes. He breaks into Ambrose's room to get Denna's ring back. This is an incredibly stupid risk and could possibly see him expelled. He doesn't think through the fact that Ambrose likely has precautions set, and he ends up setting a trap that almost gets himself caught. When escaping, he falls off a roof onto his knees and gets really banged up, and this of course sets into motion Ambrose using malfeasance against him. This whole scene was a complete disaster and a very stupid thing to do, and the way that he keeps provoking Ambrose and causing problems is not the work of a flawless hero. Then he further gives himself a headache by accusing Devi of using malfeasance and attacking her, which puts him in bad standing with her for a while. Now, Kvothe is hot-headed. He often doesn't think, but instead reacts on his emotions. Later on, we see the Iron Law being called down on the university because of him. The masters are furious, and he ends up needing to leave the university, all because of his own actions. This is what I mean when I say that Kvothe is the main cause of all of his problems. When he leaves the university, again, we see this darker side to Kvothe begin to show itself. He uses a dead body like a voodoo doll in order to brutally slaughter the bandit group in the Eld Forest, slashing throats, stabbing eyes and kidneys, etc. He then tries to call down lightning on them by essentially making a lightning rod out of the tree using sympathy. Now, whether this was his work or the work of Telu and the angels, like Martin was praying for, is debatable. Anyway, he completely massacres them, and yes, this was a defensive act. He was trying to protect his friends, so it's understandable and defensible, but it was still brutal and very much the action of an anti-hero. Then later on, we see him actually murder people, some of which were defenseless. The fake Ademre troop. He poisoned them so that, some of them can barely stand, and then tracks down and kills every last one of the fake troop. Now yes, these were obviously bad people and they were abusing the two girls, so I understand why Kvothe did what he did, but still, he is a murderer of defenseless people. I'm sorry, but this just doesn't fit the template of a Mary Sue character. Even when Kvothe later breaks down crying at the old healer's home, it's out of fear that he isn't normal, not out of, genuine guilt. And every once in a while, we see this dark, almost psychotic or sociopathic version of Kvothe appear, like when he heard about blue fire at the Mothin farm. He goes to the stable master and excessively threatens him, going so far as to threaten to cook and eat him as all the neighbors watch. And in Ademre, Vachette speaks of something dark within him, something the Lethani cannot mend. This means I cannot trust any word you say, as it comes from fear. You are clever and charming, and a liar. I know you can bend the world with your words, so I will not listen. Early on, I noticed a gentleness in you. It's a rare thing in one so young, and it was a large piece of what convinced me you were worth teaching. But as the days pass, I glimpse something else, some other face that is far from gentle. I have dismissed these as flickers of false light, thinking them the brags of a young man or the odd jokes of a barbarian. But today, as you spoke, it came to me that the gentleness was the mask, and this other half-seen face, this dark and ruthless thing, that is the true face hiding underneath. There is something troubling inside you. It is not a lack of the Lethani, but this makes my unease more, not less. That means there is something in you deeper than the Lethani. Something the Lethani cannot mend. Now, I know a lot of criticism of him being a Mary Sue comes from his time spent with Felurian in the Fae. After having fairy sex in the Fae, he comes back more confident and sort of becomes more of a ladies' man after that. And I know a lot of people find the whole fairy sex goddess thing ridiculous. I've seen some people even accuse Rothfuss of adding in his own fantasy here, which, okay, it's fine if you don't like something, but this is a classic trope. Femme fatale, whether it be a Jezebel figure, or Lilith, or sirens luring sailors to their death, or succubi appearing in dreams to seduce men. Supernatural seductresses is a trope that goes back many centuries, and it's seen in a lot of mythologies, including those that the Kingkiller Chronicle was inspired by. This is a play on folklore, not a horny teen wish fulfillment like some people seem to think. Felurian is a deadly being of pure desire and lust, and she perfectly fits in with this trope. Now, I've seen a lot of people, even some of my YouTube friends, misrepresent this scene as Kvothe is so good at sex that the sex fairy lets him go, and this simply is not what happened at all. During their encounter when Felurian is trying to destroy his mind, Kvothe, in a time of need, invokes her true name and breaks her power over him. Interesting enough, he mentions a star on his forehead like a pinprick of light, which is oddly similar to how Scarpy described the angels having silver stars on their foreheads. Anyways, it's after this that she treats him more or less of an equal, and the only way he's able to escape her is that he manipulates Felurian by using her own vanity against her, and basically holds a song hostage in order for her to let him go. This sounds like something that could easily have been in a Greek myth. So no, it's not that Kvothe was so good in bed that he was able to survive Felurian, it's that he called her true name in order to break her power and then used her own vanity against her. Now, I do understand people having problems with this scene because it does seem to come out of nowhere. It does have a purpose to show that the Fae are completely alien creatures of desire, not reason. Now, I've also seen similar criticism saying that Kvothe goes to the Ademre and becomes this master swordsman fighter, and how cheesy that is, and it makes him a Mary Sue. But this, again, isn't what happens. Kvothe repeatedly gets his butt kicked by a 10-year-old Ademre girl. Any properly trained Ademre fighter would have torn him to shreds without breaking a sweat if it came to it. That doesn't sound much like a Mary Sue to me. He spends all that time with them, and he barely makes it up in their ranks at all. He's not a master by any means. He's not even as good as Sheehan or Tempe, and Tempe is pretty much a lower rank Ademre. Tempe would definitely beat him in a fight, and yes, he does learn how to fight from them. He's better in combat than he was before, but he's by no means a skilled master. Now, I do understand why Kvothe is such a polarizing character and why he doesn't click with some people. He's clever to the point of arrogance, but charming enough to cover for it. He's likable, but constantly does morally gray stuff. He's a prodigy, but he is hot-headed and makes impulsive decisions. He's an extremely flawed character. He steals, lies, threatens people with murder if they don't do what he wants. Honestly, he almost seems like a sociopath, which is a topic for a whole other video. The thing is, he's much too complex of a character to be a Mary Sue. When you take a step back and analyze everything, you need to start questioning whether Kvothe is even the hero in the story. He's the protagonist for sure, but he's also the cause of many of the world's problems. And if he is a hero, I think it's likely that his story ends in tragedy. Let me know what you thought about this video and all the points I brought up. If you want to see more Kingkiller Chronicle content, my channel is a hub for that. I have a ton of Kingkiller videos if you've missed them. Anyway, if you like this video, make sure to drop a comment. Also, you can support my channel over on Patreon. That helps out a ton with making these lore and theory videos. And I'll see you guys in the next one.